next installment of our female executive video interview series. We're joined by Teresa Condicion. Teresa is a fantastic example of someone who's come from quite a diverse background to reach a CEO status, and we're eager to hear her story today. Teresa was a chemical engineer by trade. She then had her first job as a scientist with Procter & Gamble. 17 years later, across multiple countries and regions, she left to start her first company as a co-founder and CEO. She then, after 4.5 years, started her second company, Shoplinks, as a co-founder and CEO now, which is across Philippines, Singapore, and soon to launch in Indonesia. So watch this space. And we're happy to have you, Teresa.
It's very good to have you. Very good to be here. Very excited to be talking about this. Thank you for having me.
So let's jump right into it. Did you experience any barriers to your success?
Many. I will give one example. I had the privilege of having had a very diverse experience, living in the Philippines, Singapore, China at one point, having met so many people from all forms of life, coming from a fishing village in the Philippines where I grew up, to Singapore, which is, very vibrant. But I have always felt very hesitant to speak. And I had a lot of self-doubts, which was probably the underlying cause of that. So I remember vividly one time when I was first invited by my school as an alumni to talk about my experiences in corporate, and I just froze. and I just couldn't say a word. And I think that stayed with me, and I avoided kind of speaking engagements. I avoided even in my corporate role, I avoided that. So until at some point I couldn't avoid them anymore, right? Well, as an entrepreneur, you have to pitch to hundreds of investors. You have to speak to an organization that was rapidly growing in size. You have to talk to reporters and to journalists for interviews. You have to appear on TV and be seen by millions of people. At first, I was incapacitated, but then I just had to get through it. And I realized that actually a lot of this is two things. One, it was just a muscle that I had to build. Public speaking was something that I just have to do again and again until I feel confident about it. And then it becomes a little bit more second nature. And the second one is that it was a lot in my mindset, a lot of self-doubts. And I think that's something that I struggled with, but had to battle along the way, and still always every now and again comes up, but it just takes practice.
So what are some traits of a leader that you admire?
Yeah, I have so many leaders I admire, but I think there are two types of leaders that I really, really, really look up and aspire to be. The first one are those people who lead by purpose. And the second one is those people who lead by humility. And I think I have always loved how Gandhi, for example, led the nation, Mother Teresa, and her humble purpose and leadership, and being able to galvanize huge amount of following in order to achieve what they wanted to achieve. Of course, people like Jeff Weiner, he's also very capable in the corporate setting, but very compassionate as well. So these are my favorite leaders.
The best advice you've ever received?
When I just got promoted to a leadership position in P&G, there was one executive who came to me and congratulated me, but also said to me one advice. And that was, now that you're a leader, your whisper is like thunder. And it was very interesting because what she was basically saying was that anything that you say can actually move your organization in directions that you didn't even anticipate. Words that you say have a lot more meaning, can make or break a person's day. It can also make them overly prioritize a feature the minute you speak a lot more, right? And so I learned how to be very careful with my words.
Did you think of yourself as a future leader? More along?
Not at all, not at all. 10 years old, I imagined myself to be a scientist. I dreamt of beakers and test tubes and blue smoke all over. and so that's why I took chemical engineering. I love mathematics. That was my passion. And then I moved to P&G. I learned analytics. And then over time, I kept on receiving the feedback that you're brilliant, but you're just too technical to be a leader, and you just don't have enough leadership presence. And that, plus the fact that I thought leadership was about telling people what to do. And I grew up in poverty and in the small fishing village, where I just couldn't imagine myself telling this. I didn't have an example of success. And I would never be able to imagine myself telling this wonderful Ivy League executives what to do. But I couldn't be more wrong. And it was very interesting because I grew up more in a personal life. I was more of a leader. I had to grow up very fast because my sister was born with cerebral palsy, and therefore my parents, who had very little means, right, had to focus on her, on how to take care of her. And so I had to take care of my other siblings. We were also poor, so it was upon me to take my family out of poverty. And so I was focused on driving the family to success, getting myself educated, helping my siblings get educated, with a very single-minded purpose. So I realized that the disconnect between the corporate world, where I didn't feel entitled enough to be a leader, and my personal life was two things. One is that sense of that mindset that I could not, but more importantly, the purpose. I had a clear purpose in my personal life about taking my family out of poverty. And that made me a leader because I knew that I had to do that and I was motivated to do that. And so now I realize that a leader is somebody who has a purpose, who knows how to communicate that purpose, who knows how to galvanize and find people who share the same purpose, who can then execute that purpose with excellence and kindness. And as long as you have that, it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter what the context, right? You will be able to do it. And now I have always had a purpose of helping my family get out of poverty. And now I have the purpose of bringing a broader economic impact towards even the smallest retailer to have the capabilities of data and technology in order to compete in an increasingly digitized world. And that's the same purpose, for example, that I have in sending 100 kids to school every year, right? I have this overriding purpose of, I grew up with very little resources and I want to be able to provide the resources that I know how to provide. And that makes leadership easier to understand and easier to execute for me.
Is there any other ways that you gained more confidence in yourself over the years?
Self-care, John. As I said in the beginning, person who is happy, who is well, is able to better lead. And it is counterproductive to not be well as a leader before you can lead people. You are relied on for decisions, you are relied on for motivation, you are relied on for the feeling of well-being of a greater team. What you do is very contagious and can really impact the whole team. So caring for yourself and really ensuring that you exercise, you sleep well, is probably the most important thing I realized was going to help me. When I first started meditating, for example, that was the first time I realized all the silly self-doubt, self-criticisms I was telling myself. And just being aware of that, just being aware that it was a mindset, a thought process, really helped me clear that out much better and really made me understand that, hey, that's just a thought, that's not real, right? And so that's one example, meditation, but also exercise. I think these are important things to do as a leader.
Answer this question and then expand. My hometown is, and that's important to me because
I grew up in a small village called Binubusan, Lian, Batangas, in the Philippines. It was a very small village, about 1,000 people. My father was a farmer who eventually started selling small, in what we call sari store, a mom and pop store in front of our house. It is important for me. There I learned a lot of things. I grew up in crime, in extreme poverty, in hopelessness. But I will always see that as an integral part of me because that's also what taught me to have a purpose. It has kept me grounded. It has taught me what's possible in life, even with limited resources. It has taught me how to do my duties and now pave the way for other people who must be struggling like me. So I will always be looking back at my village and seeing that as my identity.
To all your mentees out there and to everyone listening, what's the best advice you have for them to differentiate themselves?
For me, it's being authentic, being yourself, acknowledging that you are good as you are, not trying to be someone else. I've seen a lot of female leaders try to be men. And I think that's wrong. I think each one has a different style that can be brought to the table that can really, really be very beneficial because of that diverse thoughts and diverse types of leadership. I think each one has its own strength. And I think being ourselves and not doubting that is super important. And I think remembering that for as long as we do things with purpose and kindness, and that understanding that any big task can be broken down into very small pieces that are palatable and can be done, I think nothing can stop us.
Teresa, your story is really inspiring on so many levels. Simply put, you have an awful lot to share, and with coming from a scientist to now being CEO and founder of a super successful firm that's about, again, to launch in Indonesia. We can't thank you enough.